So if it's okay with you, we'll record the speech just for sharing.
As long as I can have a copy of it, that'd be great.
Oh, sure. Okay, no problem. Yeah. No problem. Not many people made it back from Easter, I see.
I'll wait for your word to kick
Well,
off.
just a couple more guys coming, and you can start. Yeah.
Am I a giant head on a screen in front of you?
No, you're one of three, actually. Yeah,
Right.
and as soon as you share your screen, you'll actually become minuscule.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Right.
Okay, so I can share my screen, or you can introduce me, whatever you'd like to do.
So this is Professor Professor Peter Morse, multiple PhD holder. And Peter and I have done things together in the past, various projects, including the Kay Bromley Songlines exhibition with the National Museum, which launched a couple of weeks ago. So Peter and I did that together. He's enormously talented in designing and implementing cultural and scientific projects. So computational geophysics is one of his PhDs, but the other one comes from the arts. So he's this wonderful merger of art and science. And I thought it would be very refreshing to have an update from him on his latest projects. And perhaps you could give us a potted history, Peter.
I certainly will.
He's in Tasmania, by the way.
I'm at the other end of the earth from you, where it's heading into the evening and so on. So it's great to be here. I'll just start my screen sharing. Share screen. Is it this one here? Yes. And then this into presenter mode. There we go. Can you see this? Can you see my?
No, we don't see it.
Okay. Screen number 2. Can you see that screen?
No. It may be something on Yumeng's side.
Share the screen. There we go. That should be shared.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
Yep. Good. And then I need to put this in presenter mode, slideshow mode. Now, there we go. So that's sharing now?
Yes, perfect. Full
Right.
Screen, and you're just a little icon video.
Yes, good. That's all I want to be, a little icon in the corner. So this is projects, recent projects, work in progress that I'm delighted to talk to you about. A bit unpracticed. It's all hot off the press. And I've deleted the wrong slide, but anyway, my PowerPoint presentation crashed, shortly before I got this together, and it deleted certain slides. I'm going to talk about actually 2 projects today, not just this one project called VMI, the Virtual Macquarie Island project. Give you a bit of a timeline, stuff that I've been doing, my background, about the iterations that we went through with the Virtual Macquarie Island project, the sort of data that we've looked at, and then cover off on software processes that we've gone through, programming processes, data management, and future work. So, and I thought I'd start off with, of course, in this new age of large language models, what does GTP think of the Virtual Macquarie Island project? And it came up with a pretty good summary of it. It allows users, it's a VR platform coded up in Unreal Engine that allows users to explore the island's unique ecosystem and visit the animals around there. the premise is that we can provide educational information about the history, geology, and scientific research on the program on the island. It's Macquarie Island is an island about halfway between Tasmania and Antarctica. It's about 30 kilometers long, 5 kilometers wide. It's a World Heritage listed site. And it's only really visited by scientists from Parks and Wildlife in Tasmania and the Australian Antarctic Division. And it's a significant site because it was basically decimated by sealers and whalers in the 19th century. They went and killed all the hundreds of thousands of seals and albatrosses and penguins there, and to melt them down into blubber to make oil for lamps and soap. And then that sort of terminated in the 1920s. And then in about 1948, I think it was, the first scientific research station was built there. And it's since become a site for examining how to recuperate an island and restore it to its natural state, preferably without human beings being there, littering it with plastic and running around killing everything. So part of the premise behind this is the sort of VR approaches. How can you visit somewhere like that and not have people going there to visit it? And the obvious solution to that is through a simulation in virtual reality. So that's sort of the premise behind this project. So my background goes back a long time now. I look at this, it's rather alarming if I go back to the year 2000, which is when I started working at the University of Melbourne. I'd been living in Berlin, in Germany, and I returned to Australia to work at the University of Melbourne, and here on the far left-hand side, and discovered a collection of Frank Hurley photographs, which I didn't discover them. They were in a collection, but I discovered them through reading a book that had half of a panoramic pair in them, and I've always been interested in stereoscopy. So I thought this sounds like a great opportunity to start working with, a historical collection and bringing VR technologies to apply. And of course, VR technologies back 23 years ago were pretty crude, but I was very fortunate to meet Paul Burke at the Swinburne University Centre for Astrophysics and Supercomputing, and subsequently Sarah, who you are with today, and you're very lucky. And so around 2001, 2002, I started working with Paul, basically restoring Frank Hurley's stereoscopic photographic glass plates from the Australasian Antarctic expedition of 1911 to 14. And also looking at how we could generate panoramic full dome imagery using software like Terrigen, which is still around today. And then moved on through the 2000s, exploring augmented reality applications, which were very, very crude in those days, but you could, potentially get some kind of interesting stuff happening in Director, but basically graphics cards weren't really up to it. In 2006, for the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery, we produced a movie called The Blizzard, The Home of the Blizzard, which was where, using some software that Paul had developed, could virtually reshoot stereoscopic scenes from Frank Hurley's images. You can see all this stuff on my website. And that led on to shooting a 4K and 8K full dome movie in Antarctica at Mawson's Huts, where I basically built the time-lapse camera gear to go down with some Canon cameras and fisheye lenses and shot this movie down there. It's time-lapse because obviously we couldn't film at that resolution at that time. It was all built from off-the-shelf bits and pieces with zero budget. But this movie ended up playing in venues all around the world, which was very gratifying. And also around that time, there was the AV being built in UNSW, which was Geoffrey Shaw's cylindrical stereoscopic projection system. And I shot a lot of stereoscopic panoramas, so produced some content for the AV as well. And then we're moving up to around 2010, 2011, Paul and I made an iPhone app for of Mawson's Hut. So it's, you know, one of the earliest sort of little navigable apps done in Unity with some of the panoramas that I'd shot down there and a three-dimensional model. And then moving on through the years, photogrammetry became much more amenable around 2012, 2013, that sort of thing. And I was able to start creating, you know, pretty high quality photogrammetric reconstructions of the site. It's hard to recall how difficult this stuff was back then. I mean, it's only 10 years ago, and it was photogrammetry was, you know, really slow and not that great at that time. So that was you know, really the emergent possibility of reconstructing these scenes. And then in, I think it's 2015, Dome Lab was set up by Sarah at UNSW, and we showed some of this Mawson's Huts content, the polar content, and so on, through various different projection systems. Down the bottom, at the bottom, are a series of dotted lines which show really the emergence when I think the technologies became useful. So stereoscopy obviously goes back to the 19th century, so I've been using it really extensively since 2000. Then full dome surround displays, and then game engines like Unity started getting usable around 2007. And then photogrammetry, as I've indicated, and then really within the last, I suppose, what's that, sort of 6 or 7 years, virtual reality becoming much more usable and high resolution display HMDs emerging, which were not, you know, $50,000 military sort of grade headsets. They were consumer grade things like HTC Vives and so on. And of course, machine learning. And so that's my background. I've sort of, you know, matched the technologies going along, doing these various different projects. And what I'm working with now is, of course, what people refer to as XR, VR, AR, MR, mixed reality, augmented reality, and so on. And I look back at the stuff that is often presented as virtual reality, which are photographic sort of bubbles, stereoscopic bubbles, things like that. I don't really think of those as XR. Because it's really all the stuff that's on the left-hand side, which is what I tend to think of as XR these days. So we're looking at things like digital twins, which are simulations of environments driven by real data coming into the simulation, typically, of course, in a game engine. It needs to be interactive and 3D, so you can actually walk through it rather than just, you know, fixed viewpoint, stereoscopic views. There's the need to have procedural content generation that can be algorithmically generated, so it can be drawn large data sources. It's driven by data. You want programmatic interfaces, and of course, the application of machine learning. And the really important thing is that I think it needs to be useful, not just an entertainment experience, so that it has some utility. That's of interest to me from a scientific point of view, is how can we develop XR applications for inference, for understanding or generating new knowledge about the things that we're looking at, rather than just telling a story about something, even though storytelling, of course, is an important function. So I started off in 2018 in Unity, working on this virtual Macquarie Island project. I just thought, well, you know, I'll do something about somewhere I'm kind of interested in, and got some digital elevation data and sort of pop this together. And there were nice things like I can make these sort of glowy sunsets and volumetric clouds and stuff like that. And that was just a very crude, like, oh, it's feasible to do this sort of stuff now. And that led on to a curious event in my life where there was a film competition announced by Epic Games this was across Australia, and they said, we'll give you, you know, $20,000 each if you apply competitively to get into this film competition and make a film using Unreal Engine. You've got 6 weeks to do it. I didn't really know Unreal from a bar of soap, so I had to, but fortunately I'd done stuff with Unity, so I had to make this film after learning Unreal in about 6 weeks. I'll just play the beginning of it, actually. Yeah.
Does it have sound, Peter?
Yeah, is it not playing?
The movie is playing, the sound is not.
I'll turn it up, see if that goes.
Okay.
Does that play?
No, it's probably our audio setup.
Sorry?
It's probably the audio setup.
Yes,
But
it may be.
go back to the movie because now we're on something else. So the audio is not coming out. Okay.
Oh,
Here's the Zoom setting.
Okay. Have you checked your Zoom setting?
So the
yeah. I'll have to go and do that now. Let's see, Zoom settings.
I think in
There's sound. Here we go. That should do it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Tell me if this is
or elsewhere for the purpose of procuring oil, sealskins, or other animals or substances for produce of the seas or islands. Listen. My fortune.
What do we have, Captain?
We have land, Mr. Murray.
Anyway, I shall stop there. Sorry, I'll just go back to that slide. It goes on. And so what was fantastic for me about this was really that, you know, one could put these sort of characters in. It's a fairly poppy sort of movie. I see mainly lots of mistakes at the moment these days. But it was wonderful to be able to consolidate because I was the only person making this. Okay, I had a couple of friends working on the soundtrack. They had this great song, and I got them in to do the voice parts, but I did everything else at home, sitting in front of the computer. And it was amazing to me that you could render out at this quality and play in real time and so on. And so I didn't win the competition. I got finance to make this, and I discovered at the end of it that I was up against large production studios in Sydney with about 20 people working on there. So it was an eye-opener anyway.
That's
and
not
not quite fair, but anyway, that's the way it goes. So anyway, I then approached a scientist called Alex Turode, who you can see up here, who is now the chief scientist of the East Antarctica digital twin project running at the Australian Antarctic Division at the moment. He's an ecologist, and he wrote a book on Macquarie Island. He'd spent 20 years there working with the bird species, basically, on Macquarie Island. And so he was fantastic to get in touch with. And we talked about, where could we go with the project to develop it further, and decided that it would be great to make an interactive version where we go through these 7 key sites along the islands, starting from up here. I assume hopefully you can see my mouse cursor.
Yep.
We start off at the main station is site 1, and then we travel down to Bower Bay. These are all field huts across the island, and so on, and we fly down towards the final field hut at Herd Point. And these are very small buildings, as you'll see shortly, which only a couple of scientists at a time really work in them. So that led on to version 1 of this, which is, I find, a bit kind of embarrassing now looking at it, how awful it is. But it was running at the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery for about a year, and they were thrilled with it. And to me, it looked fine at the time. But you can see the whole island now that we're flying into. And this is all based upon a pretty crude digital elevation model of the island.
Welcome to Macquarie Island. I'm your guide, Alex Terroids. We're about 1,500 kilometres southeast of Tasmania, halfway to Antarctica. This is one of the remotest, wildest islands in the world. It's a World Heritage listed environment, home to an amazing array of biodiversity and really important to our scientific understanding of climate, non-native species, geology and island ecosystems. We're at the northern end of the island, on a narrow stretch of land called the Isthmus. The research station was built here in the late 1940s and has grown from a few small buildings to an important scientific research centre. It's where most people who come here work, eat and live. Okay,
I'll stop there. Let's go back. There we go. Yeah, so that was the first version of it, and we basically go through the main base, fly around to Bower Bay, which is one of the first sites, the very crude sort of hut here. I was learning there all about how to implement vegetation and so on and get that sort of more convincing. And it was one of these classic instances where you make something and you think, oh, wow, that looks pretty good. But then you look back at it and you think, God, I was really fooling myself, because now it looks quite terrible to me compared to where we're at these days. So it's an interesting sort of learning experience doing that. So the sort of data that we worked with, it was I think about a 30-meter or maybe 15-meter per pixel resolution digital elevation model. That's the maximum resolution that we got, which is pretty crude. So there was quite a bit of interpolation to get it into to build in more detail in it. And the premise was to use this to create a navigable interactive landscape and run a series of simulations on top of it, driven by other data sources. So there are a whole lot of maps. I mean, this is one of the things I struggle with all the time is looking at what sort of scientific data sources can we get from scientific databases and bring them into a context like Unreal Engine. And typically the file types they're just not conversant with each other. So there's a lot of processing that you need to go through to develop pipelines to get the data into things like GIS data and so on into Unreal Engine. So we've got sort of map data and then geological data about the island. The island's a really interesting geological structure. The reason it's a World Heritage structure, World Heritage site, is it's because it's the only place on Earth where mantle rocks are exposed on the surface of the Earth. So it's actually seafloor that's has been driven up because it's where 3 tectonic plates meet, and that's forced it up over the last million years to pop out of the sea. Iceland has parts which are a bit similar coming up, but this is specifically the only place where active mantle rocks are exposed. So it's a really geologically significant site. And I'm keen to try and build in some of this sort of geological data into its display eventually, once I figured out exactly how to do it in a convincing sort of way, so that people can learn about the geology for it in a sort of interactive display system as well. There's also very unique endemic flora and fauna there. It's populated with what are known as megaherbs, which is herbs different from other plants in the sense that they don't have woody stems, and they have grown to gigantic size. So it's covered, it's an example of island gigantism, where you get these species like daisies and so on, which would normally be quite small, like the European daisy, but they have grown to form into these giant, unique and strange looking plants that cover the island as well. So we have a bunch of vegetation maps as well. And these vegetation maps procedurally drive the biomes in Unreal Engine that populate the island. And there are a number of interesting developments and discussions to be had about that. So it's a really interesting process, because if you think about it, that if you've got floral maps or vegetation maps of any site around the world, you can use that to procedurally populate landscapes that you might be replicating algorithmically. So we moved on from that first iteration of the for the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery. They'd sort of commissioned that, having seen the first film. They said, "Oh, could we show this in the museum?" I produced that for them, version 1, and then we applied for some funding through the federal government called Visions of Australia, and that's cultural heritage funding. And the premise there was that we would build a much more sophisticated version of it with the following personnel. You can see listed on the left hand side, and the idea was that we would eventually have some sort of interactive projected version like this, where you might, for instance, here's a little child with their balloon standing on some sort of interaction system that would enable them to navigate or fly around the island. Still haven't got to that stage just yet. And I started off working with cesium to model the island, because cesium, as you may or may not be aware, is an equivalent to, it's like Google Earth, basically. It acts as a plugin. There's a JavaScript version, you can use it in web browsers and so on, but there's a plugin for Unreal Engine. And it covers the whole Earth, and it's got a bunch of layers, and you can bring in your own specialized data sets to it and tile those in and light it and all this sort of stuff. But it has a certain problem, which I'll play for you here, which you'll see, which is basically a network and tiling problem. So we have a model of the whole Earth. We can fly into this tiny speck of island in the middle of the Southern Ocean. And it all looks fine till there. And then, boom, you can see the issue that we've got clouds, which are part of the texture, the satellite texture map and so on. And it's difficult to look with, and as soon as you get down to human scale, it looks pretty crappy. The resolution is not sufficiently good. So we dispensed with that for a while, and moved on to again working with our own digital elevation models. And then we had this problem with I think this is a movie, I'll play it to you, might keep the volume down.
So here we are,
This is working with my friend Gina, who's an expert animator in Houdini. This is running in Unreal Engine 4.26. And the benefit of working with Gina, apart from her being a brilliant animator and a specialist in animals, was that we could then start using procedural geometry generation in Houdini and pipe that into Unreal through the Unreal Engine plugin. And so that gives us opens up a whole world of parametric control. You can do a lot in Unreal Engine, but bringing Houdini into it just really opens it up for procedural modeling and so on. So with this, for instance, we can use what are known as vertex animated textures. So each one of these penguins, instead of it being there as a full static mesh with a sort of an IK structure in it, a skeleton of some sort, we've got, in this case, 100,000 penguins scattered around the landscape. And the populations of colonies on the island go up to about 1 million penguins. So we were pretty happy to be able to run in just real time, fly around with 100,000 instances of penguins.
Peter, can I just ask you a question? On our screen, it's like really blocky, like not
Right.
very good frame rate. Is that just a network issue?
I presume it will be a network issue because it's a bit jerky here, but it's not blocky at all.
Okay.
So
Jerky.
yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
It just may be the rate at which it's running. I don't think I have any other network processes going on. So that was
function. There is a function in Zoom, just so you know, where you can optimize for video clip.
okay. Let's have a look. Optimize for video clip. There we go. Learn something new every day. I'll play that again. Is that working better?
Yes. Very good.
Good. Okay. So this is the
I
all
don't
the
feel
vertex
penguin.
animated textures of penguins, and we're just flying around looking at these things. So 100,000 of them. So that was great. So it gave us the capability to display these large populations of animals, and we can do things like give them procedural, like behavior trees and so on, and interact with things occurring in the environment and so on, such as other animals that would be there or people walking around, whatever, that kind of thing. So that led on to this movie, which I'll play. Maybe I'll play, I don't know, a few minutes of it anyway. This was the final product that we've released. We told them at the museum it's version 2, but it's actually version 1.5. Other stuff is in progress.
And you see the aurora borealis from there.
Wild and mysterious, subantarctic Macquarie Island is as remote as it is awe-inspiring. A speck of land in the immense Southern Ocean, halfway between Tasmania and Antarctica. Its emerald hills are the peaks of a mountain range rising abruptly from the sea. A geological wonder, it is part of a vast structure called the Macquarie Ridge Complex, a chain of submerged mountains extending from the seafloor to the south, northwards to the Southern Alps of New Zealand. Macquarie Island began forming sometime within the last 1 million years. It is a rare, exposed part of oceanic crust, slowly pushed up by the immense forces created by the collision of 2 tectonic plates. It is the only place on Earth where mantle rocks are actively exposed above sea level. A World Heritage Environment, Macquarie Island is renowned for its biodiversity and important to our scientific understanding of climate, geology and island ecosystems. We're at the northern end of the island, on a narrow stretch of land called the Isthmus, a strip of low-lying beach joining the main island to North Head. Macquarie Island Research Station was originally established in the late 1940s and has grown to become an important scientific research centre. It's home to an ever-changing community of scientists, tradies and support staff, ranging from around 12 in winter to 30 in summer. There are rangers from Parks and Wildlife, a doctor, chef, comms officers, meteorologists and a station leader. Daily life centres around the mess, which includes a big kitchen and dining room, a bar and the doctor's surgery. Scientists come here to research the climate, environment and wildlife, with facilities for biology and ecology, as well as geophysics and cosmic ray science. There are installations for seismic, astronomical, atmospheric and weather observations, and forecasts made here have implications for the rest of the world. At the southeastern end of the station are the fuel tanks for the diesel generators which power the station. They're refuelled each year by ship, which is here for a couple of weeks to resupply fuel, food, people and equipment. The Inare Sat Dome provides satellite communications. Now we'll go on a spectacular flying journey around the island, visiting the main field huts along the way. Let's follow the albatross. The low-lying terrace along the western coastline is known as the featherbed. The featherbed hosts a complex plant community of lichens, mosses and liverworts, adapted to the harsh salty environment inundated by the sea. It also forms nesting grounds for the northern giant petrel, a bird that, fully grown, has a wingspan of over 2 metres. The featherbed's water table is so close to the surface that walking along it is like walking along a soft, spongy cushion. People can fall through the thin surface layer into the water below. In some areas, people have been known to sink up to their waist. 2 to 3 hours walk from the main station lies the broad swathe of Bower Bay, an amphitheatre of steep hills cut by streams flowing from the plateau. Light-mantled and wandering albatross breed in the hills to the west. Elephant seal harems fill the beach in summer, with hundreds of pups born each year. Large royal penguin colonies populate the low-lying dunes and tussock. On still nights, the call of many species of burrowing petrels can be heard, including the elusive soft-plumaged petrel. Bower Bay Hut is one of the few huts on this wild west coast. Although it's one of the closest huts to the main station, it's difficult to access by boat, so it's mostly resupplied by helicopter. It's a hub for ecological research and parks ranger activities, with research including surveys of seal and bird colonies, coastal vegetation and marine debris. Even here, in the remote Southern Ocean, plastic bottles, polystyrene and lost commercial fishing gear washes ashore, damaging the pristine environment.
Okay, I'll just stop that there.
Big improvement.
A big improvement.
Yeah.
Oops. Let's see. Yes, it's come a long way. So we have. We basically do this tour of the island, and then there's the whole thing plays for 40 minutes. Obviously, I can't play it now.
Okay.
But what was interesting is that I sort of rendered this loop bit at the end of it, and people just love it. I mean, they just sit there in the museum and watch the entire looping 20 minutes where we just slowly pan around bits of the island, and the little avatars of the scientists do their things. They're little AIs that wander around doing stuff, and the animals do things and so on. So it's really, approaching a kind of simulation level. And really the next steps to push ahead with this is to make it such that it runs well in a VR headset and one can wander around and so on. The idea was that you would approach scientists and have conversations with them. So I'll turn to that now.
Can we ask some questions?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
So the decision to put text into that nice world
into here, that's You mean above the actual buildings or the
Yeah,
subtitles?
the ones above the buildings and stuff.
Yeah,
so-
it was really about making it clear the names of the places that we were going to. It's really a kind of museum type decision.
Yeah.
You know, aesthetically, I would much rather not have those sorts of things. And you know, I mean, there's a lot of debate to be had. I mean, like Gina, for instance, who I work with, hates unreal metahumans. Just, oh, they're so awful. They look like they come from Thunderbirds or something like that.
They do.
which I don't mind, because I quite like the Thunderbirds. I mean, that's my childhood, that sort of thing. So, you know, it's like Macquarie Island is go or whatever. And for those of you who don't know, the Thunderbirds were a 1970s animatronic television series, or 1960s animatronic sort of puppet television series. So they have this sort of puppet-like quality. It was basically, all this stuff was done for, you know, museum friendliness and so on, and really what I would like to do is to have some sort of interface where you could turn this on and off. But as soon as you have interactive interfaces, you have a whole lot of concerns about maintenance, people touching things and blowing things up, and computers dying and all this sort of stuff. So we just ended up going for a really simple looping video on a kind of a bright side player.
And it's just in 2D then?
And it's just in 2D, but I am in the process of rendering it out in doing a stereoscopic render of it, a 360 stereoscopic render. But of course, it also will run in real time in VR, which is, you know, much more interesting to do that, and to be able to wander around and interact with things. Because we have really a simulation of the entire island, and
amazing.
you know, and it's a big job to do a whole island, I can tell you. I mean, to get all the landscape accurate, and the water, and the plants, and all this kind of stuff. And that was, it's really just two of us did this over about a year, so it was a massive undertaking to get that all done. So what I didn't manage to pull off was this thing where we basically interviewed a group of scientists covering ecology, a ranger, geology, seabird, seals, etc., etc. So I've got a whole bunch of interesting interviews with these people. And the question, and what I intend to do when I have some time finally one day, and maybe some more money hopefully to pay for it, is to get their interviews to drive their characters. So we had these sort of fairly informal kinds of interviews with a bunch of questions. They responded, and we will use their sort of metahuman avatars. This was a very amusing, contentious process. I thought, scientists, they're not vain. I was completely mistaken. I got them to select, there's a kind of library of face types and head types and body types that you get through the metahuman interface, and you have 3 parents. And so I gave them a copy of this library, like a PDF, and said, okay, select 3 parents that you think might represent you, and I'll interbreed these 3 parents and produce an avatar for you. And so I did that, and then and I thought they'd all be fine with them, but they weren't. And they were like, I don't look like that, I'm more handsome than that, I'm younger, or whatever. So it was quite an interesting process, but eventually it all calmed down when they realized it was silly to worry about it. So we've got all these metahumans now, representing them, that they're reasonably happy with. And the next step is to use the Omniverse toolkit, where there are things like audio to face, which is basically, it's got a deep learning system where I can take the audio of their interviews, get that to animate this face model, export that as an Alembic animation file, bring it into Unreal, and then set up. So we have a series of interviews and responses. So you would be able to walk up to their avatar and it will be animated in this way, because it's much too complicated to do all the animation yourself. So thank goodness for the Omniverse audio to face toolkit. So we've got this sort of really, data visualization pipeline occurring here. So we've got this data viz, we've got concerns about the interaction, how that's going to be set up, how it's going to be well posed for users to interact with. And my hope is at the end we can generate some knowledge or information about it. It's not just going to be, my argument was that it's not just for a museum context, but it would be interesting for the scientists themselves to do things like mission planning or survey planning or whatever. And if you can go to a simulation of an environment prior to going there, it may help you plan some scientific missions that you're undertaking there. The sort of structure of data flow throughout the whole thing is quite complicated. So on what I'm moving to now is not just wanting to have a simple application that one compiles and then runs on a desktop computer, because it's the graphics requirements of it are quite prodigious. So I run it on a 3090. I'd like to have a 4090. That would be much better. A big, fast sort of gaming machine. And that's problematic to show in a museum context or to get out to other players and users and so on. And it's also problematic in terms of that once you compile something with a particular data set, you're kind of locked into that data set. I'm sort of really interested in looking at how we can keep it something that's updatable. So if we look on the left-hand side here, what I'm interested in looking at as this moves forward is this bunch of different data sources. So we've got GIS data sources, like a whole bunch of shape files and so on that you normally look at in a GIS software. Satellite data sources. This brings me to the work that I'm doing with Chris Fluke at the Swinburne Center for Astrophysics and Supercomputing at the moment, where we're looking at multi and hyperspectral satellite data sets, which have a whole lot of machine learning capabilities, are being built around these, and there's a lot of stuff that's very interesting to look at through a computer game engine sort of interface. Obviously, photographic data sources, 3D data sources, and these days, photogrammetry and particularly NERFs, neural radiance fields, are particularly interesting. And I think the whole photogrammetry thing is probably going to be largely superseded by NERFs. And of course, if you are familiar with Luma AI, NERFs already run in Unreal Engine. So they're fantastic for a combination of, programmatic kind of geometry and interface design in Unreal, and then bringing in the neural radiance thing. So you can really approach really high levels of photorealism for capturing, for instance, historic sites or island landscapes or whatever. Moving on from the data, there's the kind of computational side. If we look at data sources which are typically hosted in things like Threads, GIS systems use Threads databases, which are online databases, which you can query them using OpenDAP, so you can construct types of queries to subset. If you've got a very large data cube, you can subset that through your query mechanism, so it becomes a subsettable data cube. So you can say, I'm looking for this particular part of this data set on this day at this location, and then bring that in and start visualizing it through Python, C++. And of course, there are applications in machine learning and all the emergent stuff now with AI, large language models, and agents, which are completely fascinating. So, and those last two, I think, are fascinating, not only from point of view of how LLMs really assist in programming, because there are things like there's a whole Python API for Unreal, and as soon as you've got a Python API, you can bring in all the scientific Python libraries, which is fantastic. And this it's a huge area to learn about. So working with an LLM can really help you from a programmatic point of view. And the other really interesting thing from the point of view of having avatars of scientists walking around an island is the possibility to build agents with LLMs and things like LangChain and AutoGPT. So they become updatable sort of agents and interactive agents on an island. I'm only just thinking about that. This sort of stuff is pretty exciting. Obviously, there's the tie-in with 3D modeling, Blender, Houdini engine. And what's occurring now with Unreal Engine 5.2 is they're really pushing for the procedural generation of foliage across landscapes. This was the the big problem that we had with when version 5 came out was that dealing with a large island, with a large environment, it's really pushing it to get a high resolution geometry of flora and fauna populating across the screen, but that's largely being solved now with version 5.2, and they're building in a lot of georeferencing stuff as well. And then this pipes on to XR devices at the end, screen, HMD, mobile, and so on. So I'm thinking through these sorts of workflows. This brings me to what I'm doing with, how am I doing for time? What I'm doing with Chris Fluke, the Playable Earth residency. ANAT is the Australian Network for Art and Technology. And so it's a kind of organisation based in Adelaide who have a remit to work with artists across Australia, placing them in scientific organisations where they can work with artists in those organisations. Work with scientists, sorry, in those organisations. So I'd sort of come to the end of my Macquarie Island sort of funding, and I was like, oh, what am I going to do now for a buck and keep my head above the water? And I sort of reached out to Chris and said, Chris, I'm sort of interested in astrophysics and this and that and the other. I've got some ideas. What would you like to do? And he said, oh, this is fantastic, because he saw the Macquarie Island stuff. And he's part of this thing called the SmartSat CRC, the Cooperative Research Centre. And they're specifically looking at new, novel ways of doing Earth observation stuff. And clearly, having worked on Macquarie Island with satellite data and all this kind of stuff, it ties in pretty well with what's occurring. Using satellite data and so on. And he's specifically interested in multispectral and hyperspectral satellite data. And as I've looked at that, it's fascinating as well. And as we've been pushing through this, there are a lot of things that are really compelling in the area of deep learning and AI, which are, I think you have to engage with these LLMs and this sort of novel sort of paradigm of creating content and programming, and it's really revolutionary in a big way. So I, in the last few weeks, attended the NVIDIA, it's the GTC conference. This is a bit of a blank slide here. I did have something in it because it crashed, it disappeared. And that exposed me to all the interesting stuff going on I've been working with Omniverse for a while, but really what's occurring with pixel streaming and Cloud XR and all this kind of stuff. So what we're interested in doing is looking at ways of working with mobile devices, such as mobile phones and tablets and stuff like that, rather than thinking, oh, we have to rely on a super high-end computer with an HMD attached to it and, you're tied into a particular place. So what you can do with Cloud XR is use a virtual machine running in the cloud with Unreal Engine installed. You can run your environment in Unreal Engine and over 5G stream that to your mobile device. So we've got this, and we've got a whole bunch of interesting stuff occurring here. So on the mobile, we've got LiDAR, depth cameras, Wi-Fi's, GPS, all the various sensors and things like that. A whole lot of interesting data going back to some sort of compute infrastructure in the cloud that we can do something with, and we're returning something in return. So we're thinking through, how we can use the sensor capabilities of a mobile phone for interacting with large data stores which are held on the cloud of Earth observation data. And on the other side, in the cloud, we've got large data repositories, a lot of compute, a lot of interpretation that occur. And so the things that I'm looking at the moment are the Omniverse XR, which will be running in Azure Cloud XR, where you can get a virtual machine running Unreal Engine 5. Really interesting services like Azure Cognitive Services. So that enables you to have speech to text and text to speech, which enables you to pipe or develop. I mean, what's clearly going to happen in AR and VR or XR interfaces in general is that you're not going to type into tiny little screens. You need to talk to them. So it's a way of constructing really sort of intuitive audio interfaces where one can talk to a cognitive service, which can then talk to an LLM. So for instance, I've got the OpenAI API working with Unreal Engine. So we have an AI running within the engine itself, and that can return responses, and you can get it to role play and develop agents using AutoGTP and LangChain, which is super exciting. And there's a whole lot of technology around vector stores or embeddings, so you can create artifacts which have memory, or individuals which have memory, or agents that have memory, and you can interrogate them and get them to role play and do all sorts of interesting things in a simulation context. And if we're looking at Azure sort of cloud services, there are the planetary computer, there's the DEA, all this kind of stuff, which now become interrogatable as a consequence of these cloud scenarios. And this can all run on a super fast machine on the back end, and then pixel stream over 5G with really minimal latency. So you get rid of the whole issue of the fact that you've got crappy limited GPUs on mobile devices because you're just doing pixel streaming. And so that's going to be the future of things. And this is my little kind of not very convincing mock-up of what we're thinking about at this stage, getting sort of running where
Risdon Vale also is close to Risdon Brook Park and Dam, which offers a pleasant walking track round the dam of 4 kilometres, taking in views of Mount Wellington and its surrounds.
Some information about the landscape over there.
So these are just sort of demonstrating that we can do segmentation and you know, depth calculations, streaming, pixel streaming basically to a mobile phone, and run Unreal Engine simulations, have geolocation coordinate information, and have a voice interface running on our back end. Very crude, very early days for this sort of stuff, but I'd really like to, you know, this is where we're going with things like the Virtual Macquarie Island project and other islands that we're thinking of working with. And I think that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Fantastic.
I'll stop sharing there and come back to video. There we go. Great.
Very good. That was very interesting, actually. I mean, also for the engineers in our lab, I will ask them to watch the video. They're not here, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, that's super great. So this conference that you went to with NVIDIA and Omniverse, and what was that?
It's just online. I mean, so you can go and watch all the video. I'd encourage everyone there to go and to the NVIDIA GTC 2023 conference, and there's a whole bunch of stuff there.
Yeah.
So it's different to the GDC. It's the GTC. Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Are there any questions? I mean, for the people doing the map thing, I think that was pretty interesting, but an approach things. And obviously, so how long do you think that nerfs are going to take to become good enough for high fidelity cultural heritage?
Oh, I think they are already. Absolutely. Yeah. If you do them well, you can get instantly photorealistic navigable environments right now.
Yeah, sure. But you know, I mean, we're dealing with priceless cultural artifacts, and it's ensuring that the data quality is the highest possible.
Yeah, sure. Because they come from photographic imagery. You go in there with your super high resolution camera, photograph everything, and generate the nerf from that.
Yeah.
And then as the nerf technology improves, then you will get you've got the original source data to work from, because you'd have to downscale it for you for
Yeah,
the current.
Sure. Yep.
But I think the interesting thing is that you can bring that into a game engine, navigate around it, and look at interesting ways of interrogating it through a programmatic interface like the game engine. And that's pretty compelling. Yeah.
And we're also thinking that the segmentation stuff is really good for our merchant panorama, right?
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. And there's and it's all, you know, zero shot sort of learning stuff with you know, segment anything things and I mean, there's so much that's going on in AI and deep learning. There was an amazing thing I saw recently, which was to do with the generation of stereoscopic panoramas from satellite views. So it's not having any ground data at all. It's just saying, well, you've got a satellite view. What would it look like to have a panoramic view? And it will recognize what trees are and cars and things like that, and basically prognosticate, you know, generative AI and create a panorama for you. And that's just going to get better and better, that sort of stuff. Because of course, you can match that with ground truth through things like Google Street Map and so on.
Yeah.
And once you start doing that, then you've essentially got a whole learning sort of ground truthing sort of process that's occurring with that too. Yeah.
Interesting. No questions? Or just deep down? Thank you very much.
Okay.
So Peter will get in touch and chat about that ARC thing, and also about perhaps you coming to visit to do something fun with us.
I would love that. That would be great. You all look very friendly.
We're very friendly here in Switzerland.
Yes, good stuff. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I shall hang up, and I'd like to get the recording of this.
Yeah, I'll send you the recording. No problem. That's
okay,
really
brilliant. Okay, well, have a great morning, everyone. It was really nice to meet you all. Okay, cheers.